Your first question might be, why choose Limbo? Why pick a niche indie game over a decade old that takes about an hour or two to beat and barely has any story to speak of? Well, first of all, this game just so happens to be the one I've been trying to 100% in my free time. At this point, it's basically impossible for my brain to not draw connections between the two. I mean, I spent 63 hours chasing a single achievement. It's more than I'm proud to admit, and now every possible death in the ideal route is permanently etched into my brain. So when I say I've had more than enough time to analyze the background and surrounding wilderness in this game, I do in fact mean it. Plus it's short, so short that the official story itself is exactly one sentence long in the description of Limbo's Steam page. Uncertain of his sister's fate, a boy enters Limbo. That's it. The developers hardly elaborate on it in an effort to keep the story as vague as possible. This means it's quick to cover and doesn't demand several hours of lore diving. If we go based on what happens as the player progresses through the game, the story is as follows. The boy wakes up in a forest and sets out to find his sister, facing obstacles like traps, a giant spider, a hostile group of boys, and a dangerous factory filled with saws and electrical hazards. In the end, he reunites with his sister who's sitting blissfully underneath a treehouse, unaware of the horrors her brother had to experience just to find her. As we can see, it mostly fits the hero's journey, the only difference being a lack of camaraderie. Unless you really want to push the envelope and argue that the birds that eat the parasitic worms off your head and this thing are your friends. Firstly, what does the word limbo literally mean? The word usually has two meanings, one describing an in-between state or condition. In Limbo, the environment alone fits this definition perfectly. Additionally, according to the documentary Myths and Monsters, some groups historically believe that the wilderness is somewhere in between, an otherworldly realm unsafe for humans. The game leans into that idea by using uncanny monochromatic visuals, defying physics, incorporating a humongous spider and evil children, and adding incredibly frequent death traps. Overall, this helps make the world seem like it's on a completely different plane of existence. The other thing that helps create the illusion of the in-between is how the game uniquely blends society and wilderness. A solid fraction of the game is spent in forests littered with man-made contraptions, while other portions of Limbo takes place in decrepit urban structures that are actively falling apart and getting overtaken by nature. The two coexist, but neither exists in a pure form as a result. In a way, the relationship between these two settings is like the one between Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Like Enkidu, who represents the wilderness that has been gradually changed by society, the forest in Limbo has also been heavily modified by humans. On the other hand, the urban sections of Limbo represent a collapsed society that the wilderness has since reclaimed. Likewise, Gilgamesh, who represents civilization, became more grounded after meeting Enkidu. After Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh vows to wander the wilderness in a lion's skin, showing his grief as he attempts to mimic Enkidu's initially wild state. The intertwining of nature and society, much like the bond between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, reinforces Limbo's setting as a space that is neither wholly wilderness nor entirely societal, but instead somewhere in the middle. The other definition of Limbo revolves around Christianity. Limbo is described as being somewhere that is neither heaven nor hell, sort of, and a place for unbaptized children and people that died pre-Christianity. If this concept sounds familiar, it's because it's something that appears in Dante's Inferno. The first canto hints at the existence of Limbo when Dante meets his future guide and celebrity crush Virgil. Despite Virgil's successes as a poet, he was pagan and born pre-Christianity, and therefore cannot cross the pearly white gates. Although there's a lack of religious paraphernalia in the game, there's certainly connections that can be made between Dante's Inferno and Limbo. Firstly, our protagonist wakes up in a forest. This is not unlike the one that Dante finds himself in the first canto. Additionally, the forest in Limbo is no less savage, rough, and stern than the one in Dante's Inferno. Secondly, the people in Dante's Limbo aren't being physically tortured like the souls in the lower circles, but they still suffer. Their pain comes from knowing that they'll never reach heaven, even though they're on the cusp of hell. While our protagonist is most certainly physically suffering the entire time, the ending of Limbo works in a similar way as Dante's Limbo. When the boy finally reaches his sister, it's one of the calmest scenes in the whole game. The forest brightens and the atmosphere softens as he walks up a small sunlit hill, very similar to the sunlit mountain Dante sees in Canto 1. It even gives the player feelings of tranquility and closure. This actually implies that the sister is symbolically a form of salvation. But this of course doesn't last. If the player sticks around after the credits roll, they'll see a ruined treehouse with flies buzzing around the spots where the brother and sister had been standing just before. It immediately makes the player doubt whether or not the reunion was even real, and wonder if the boy and his sister are in fact dead. And if the boy is dead in the end, did he ever actually find salvation? Did he escape Limbo, or is he doomed just like the souls from Dante's Limbo? While there were plenty of other works I could have analyzed, Limbo was shockingly suitable. It wasn't just one or two convenient parallels. There were countless of moments throughout the game that made me think of all the literature we had been studying. But unfortunately, there just wasn't enough time to discuss all of it. However, that's exactly what makes this analysis enjoyable. Even a short, wordless indie game can effectively use the wilderness to help support a story's narrative. Honestly, I felt my main goal for this video was to encourage others to see how the wilderness is being used in other pieces of media, whether it be literature, film, or even video games. If Limbo can accomplish this much with nothing but silhouettes and silence, imagine what could be found elsewhere.